we're honored to be joined by Dr. Bilal Philips, a Jamaican-Canadian Islamic scholar, educator, and founder of the International Open University. After embracing Islam in 1972, Dr. Philips has spent decades shaping Islamic thought, authoring over 50 books. His best-known works include The Fundamentals of Tawheed, The Evolution of Fiqh, and The Purpose of Creation. These books transformed lives around the globe. In this episode, we dive deep into the Islamization of knowledge, a powerful and much-needed discussion in today's world.
Sheikh, assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much indeed for giving us your precious time.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's my duty and my honor to be a part of your program.
That's very, very kind of you. Now, you had the Islamic online university, and there's a lot of knowledge-based conversations and the Islamization of thought and desecularization of thought and so forth. We will get to those, but before that, I would like to start with my favorite topic. Now, some of the existential questions that I get a lot when I talk to people, do the live streams and debates. It's about the purpose of creation. Now, you happen to have written a book on this topic, so who better than you to talk about it? Now, in your book, you mentioned that when the question of purpose is addressed, there are two perspectives. There's a perspective of God as to what caused God to create us. And then there is a question from human beings. That's us. Why are we created? Well, I suppose why God created us, that can be left with God. But from human beings, when we say we are created, there has to be a purpose. What is that purpose?
I would say, Bismillah, that the purpose is to fulfill the goal which Allah has created for human beings, that we basically were created for paradise, and we are the ones who choose whether we want to go to paradise ultimately, or to hell, based on the various considerations that we hold with regards to life in this world.
Right. So the purpose ultimately is to seek the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, manifestation of which comes in the form of us entering in the paradise, in the Jannah. I get this question a lot, that was there any need for God to create us? Now, even though this question doesn't have any philosophical depth, because once one has accepted that God is all-knowing, so the God's decision would be based on that knowledge. And since I can't match that knowledge, I can't ask that question. Because for me to be able to pose a question, I need to at least have that type of knowledge. But still, our creation, does that benefit God in any way?
I would say no.
Right.
That God doesn't do things for his benefit. If he's benefiting, it would be the creatures, the world that he has created. That benefit comes from that creation in the world which he created.
Yeah. Okay. This question, now we go into the areas of the knowledge and how the knowledge can be influenced by certain ideas. It could be secular ideas, or Islamic ideas, and so forth. As astonishing as these questions are, and I'm sure philosophers are dealing with these questions for a very long period of time, and theologians are doing a very good job too, but for a young man living in Lahore and Karachi, basically places that are known for its conformation to the Islamic ideology for them to ask this question. Obviously, the question must have come from somewhere. And what we have seen is that most of that comes from our universities and colleges, the institutes where we do have the knowledge, but it is heavily secularized. You're working on the other hand. I mean, this is a completely different paradigm. You believe that the knowledge must be Islamized. Now, in principle, of course, no one can disagree with that from the Muslim viewpoint. But when you say that the knowledge has to be Islamized, quite often our knowledge, when the concept of knowledge, when it comes to an ordinary Muslim, for them the knowledge is knowing what Islam says about certain hukm, for example, or the certain rituals, for example.
Halal and the haram.
Halal and haram, for example, the everyday matters and so forth. But your book, the purpose, goes much wider than that. You believe that every act can be turned into ibadah from Islamic perspective. And obviously the acts that we take, they do come from some type of knowledge, like IT is a knowledge. It's a field, and there are professional areas as well. How do we Islamize them? I think I should frame this question this way, otherwise I'll get lost in the examples and things, one thing lead to another. So how do we Islamize those areas?
Well, I think when we say Islamization, it is really teaching the subject from an Islamic perspective,
Right.
comparative perspective.
Yeah.
Because in every issue, every concept, there will be a good side and a bad side. So it is identifying that good side and bringing it forth for the students to understand that this is what Islam upholds.
Okay.
So we're Islamizing the knowledge in the sense that whatever is not correct in it, we identify and identify why. Because it's not just to say halal, haram, do, don't do, but to understand why is it haram or forbidden, and why should we not do it? What is the consequence?
Right.
So the student learns from critical thinking perspective, as opposed to rote memorization and acceptance of halal and haram.
Right. So it's not necessarily just the infusion of the morality in the jobs that we do, but also the technical side of it. So, for example, when I say the moral side of it, I mean, there could be a cab driver. I mean, there is no Islamic cab driver, given the fact that Islam doesn't teach how to drive cab. But there's a moral side to it. For example, if you have a customer who is new in your city, doesn't know what the actual fare is, a cab driver can actually overcharge him. But the Islamization side of that is that morally it is not allowed in Islam, therefore you don't do it. So there is no technical side, there is a moral side to it. Now that, I suppose, is easy to understand. But when you say that we teach to the students what they should and what they should not do, that seems to me that it's directly linked with the technical side of things. For example, what you should be doing as an, say, IT expert. And by technical side, I like to clarify, I don't mean the coding side of it. I mean, if I'm building a project, and if that project then ends up causing harm to humanity, so yes, I'll be using a lot of my knowledge and skill, but then the Islamization of it would be that I should not be doing it. So it's not just a moral side of not doing something bad, but it's using my skill in creating something which is going to be beneficial for humanity. Am I right to understand that, or do you mean something else by it?
Well, what I mean is that when a particular topic is dealt with in whatever field that's being studied, taught, etc.,
Yeah.
it is looked at from both sides.
Right.
There will be a side which is obviously beneficial, useful, etc.
Yeah.
And then a side which may have use and may have benefit,
Yeah.
but the harm in it is greater than the benefits.
Right.
So we want the students to be able to look into the various issues that arise in that area of specialization and be able to find their way through the questions which will arise with regards to its benefit and its harm. And of course, it goes without saying that if the benefits outweigh the harm,
Yeah.
then we say this is something doable, etc.
Yeah.
Maybe with some limitations on it.
Yeah.
And if it's not that one of outweighing, but the good side of it is the majority, the greater majority of what is there in that particular case or circumstance. And it's purely good as far as we can see it.
Right.
Because there may be what is beyond our ability to extract and identify all of the evil, is limited. I mean, only Allah ultimately can do that. So we do it to our ability. And when we find out later on that, oh, there was an element of harm that we didn't realize, we make adjustments, which Allah doesn't have to do.
Sure. So it's, in other words, it's more jurisprudence or the fiqh grade work where we explain how things ought to be done. In countries like Pakistan, for example, we have an emerging field called the Sharia compliance. And many of the corporate companies, they have started Sharia compliance. So what they do is they have the panels of ulamas, and if they don't, they create on ad hoc basis. And the job of those panels is to give them the Sharia rulings on their business practices. That this is okay, this isn't. And it has quite an appeal to it in Pakistan. But my way of thinking is that why have a situation in which we do the Sharia compliance and try to get rid of the evil practices, anti-Islamic practices, in a given company when we can have a Sharia compliant Pakistan? So the entire paradigm becomes Sharia compliant, which means we don't have to navigate our way through here and there. And it's something which is, it's kind of a great dream. We're working on it. Many people are also working on it. But in your view, are the efforts to create a Sharia-driven country, if they run in parallel to making individual institutions Sharia compliant, if they run parallel to that, is that better? Or would you say that if you work at the macro level, then the micro levels will be accommodated with that because now you have the entire paradigm of Sharia? Or do you think that's difficult to achieve at the country level, at state level? So let's do the best we can.
Well, I would say that the shotgun approach, where we try because we don't know the end results.
Yeah.
We try a variety of different approaches and then analyze the harm and the benefit which comes from the various approaches, is the open-minded way to go ahead, as opposed to just saying this is the way to do it and the greatest good is here.
Yeah.
That's assuming that we have that knowledge
Mm.
of what is the greater good in all applications of the product or concept.
Right. Okay. Taking it to the next section, that is the desecularization of thought. Unfortunately, the materialism and secularization of knowledge, I'm talking in the context of Pakistan, it has become such a big problem that it's almost like, not exactly like, but kind of like subverting someone's fundamental human rights. And this is how I make a case, and then I'll ask for your view on that. That if I am a Muslim, is it not my fundamental human right that I should have the opportunity to learn about my religion? But the system is constructed in a way that there would be every possible hurdle on this path, and I will be deflected constantly onto the other side. So, for example, our universities, they teach us the economic theory, for example, international relations theory, for example. So who do we learn in these disciplines? In the economic side, for example, we have Karl Marx, we have Adam Smith, Keynes. Yeah, it's wonderful. Who we don't have is every Muslim. Like zero, nothing. Same goes for politics. When we talk about international relations, for example, we have some fantastic scholarship from people like Al-Shaybani, for example, talking about the CR law and how nations work with one another. It's something, it's a concept which is rooted, way back in classical scholarship of Islam. But that's kind of not, I won't say not allowed, because there is no express policy prohibiting that, but it has become a general practice that the Muslims, they don't have the right to understand what their religions say about these things. How do you think we can resolve that part? Would it be just a counter knowledge, or would it be inclusion of Islamic theory among other theories? So whilst people are learning about other theories, what Marx said, what Adam Smith said, other people, and so forth, they also get to learn that this is what my religion says, and now I'm in a better position to draw a comparative analysis.
Well, I would propose, if I were in charge of a system of education, I would propose that it be looked at along with the other systems, and the instructor, who is supposed to be the master in that field, he's qualified, PhD, etc. So he may or likely will have a more intricate understanding. He would guide the students towards the Islamic ideal. So looking at the other systems, it would not be a matter of just choosing the Islamic one because we called it the Islamic one.
Yeah.
And the others may have elements of Islam there in them.
Oh, sure.
So we're not doing it simply because of nomenclature. We've given it that name, so that's where we should be. But to have the students grasp and understand why this one, in spite of the fact that it does have Islamic elements in it, it's not the better choice in terms of the direction that we should be taking. This particular subject should go down this path. And why? Because of A, B, C, D, E. And allow opportunity for discussion, debate, even if it's something that's commonly misunderstood, to make it into a program which you can put on the website of the school that other members of the school would grasp this, gain benefit from it, etc.
But this is a very good way of looking at it, because whatever exists already, I mean, the economic theories, for example, I mean, if those principles that are compatible with Islam, if they are explained then and there, and that could help students because they don't have to go into learning something new, but the connection is already there, so they can extrapolate that. And I think there are some key areas where we can work on this. For example, in capitalism, our students get to learn about the principles of free market. But we also have some historians of economy who believe, people like Benedict Kohler, for example, who believe that Islam introduced the concept of free market economy. Obviously, it's not exactly like Adam Smith, but it has resemblance. So the question we can create in a student's mind is that if I am encouraged to learn about a system and accept that system which was created a couple of hundred years ago, and if that system bears any resemblance with my religion, which is much older than that, then perhaps that's more intriguing for me, that I go and look into that and see what else it offers. Same goes in Marxism. There are some elements, actually. I mean, in fact, there is a conversation I was having with a very hostile Marxist in Pakistan. I said to him that there is a hadith that this is not the verbatim, this is the gist of it, that the rights of progeny of Adam alayhi salam it includes three things. That is food, shelter, and clothing. And I said, well, that's exactly what Marxism is. I said, yeah, it started in 1917 as a formal system. And say, oh, are you saying Islam is Marxist religion? I said, no. Exactly the opposite side, that your system bears some resemblance with what we've got for many, many hundred years before. So I think what you're saying, it could make a lot of sense, that if not as a separate system, but we can include Islamic provisions in what already exists. But that takes me to a different question, and I didn't have that question planned, but as you were speaking, it came to my mind that we've had some rather an extraordinary theory in Pakistan. It didn't completely translate into the education system, but somewhat it did. And that was that we shouldn't teach our children science. When you come across something like this, it takes, you're taken aback by that you don't teach science. Okay, well, what do we teach then? That, no, we don't say don't teach science at all, but you Islamize science in a way that as people are learning about the phenomena, about the earth and the other planets and so forth, that comes from the Islamic perspective. So instead of saying that the distance between earth and moon is so much, it should be taught as Allah has created the distance between earth and moon, which is this much. And that goes for everything, not just the physical phenomena we see out there. For example, cosmology. Same goes for biology. So don't teach biology as a separate subject. Teach that as Islam, that now you are getting to learn about human body. Are these some of the ideas that you also subscribe to, or do you think they go tad too extreme?
Well, I think we're utilizing that approach is most suitable for certain ages. That is the determining factor.
Yeah.
For people who are more advanced in age and understanding, you may not use that methodology. So it's the need of the hour, you could say. These people on this level, etc. We explain to a child in grade 3 in a different way from what we do to a child in grade 10. So we have that flexibility, though we're talking about the same thing. We give them information which is suitable for their level of understanding. And that's why many times I've come across books on Islam for children,
Yeah.
young people, where they, focus on details in grade 3,
Sure.
grade 4, 5, on details of the differences between, Hajj Tamattu and Hajj Ifrad.
Yeah.
They don't need to know that.
Yeah, sure.
You don't need to go into that. That's just cramming into their heads information, which is that's overkill.
Overkill.
So we give them according to what's most relevant and comprehensible for their age. And that is effective teaching. That's just teaching methodology.
Sure. Okay, so as they grow, things can be a bit more detailed. Younger they are, the simpler the education should be. Well, that's fair enough. Now, Islamization. I suppose when we talk about the Islamization of knowledge, it's we are talking about the Islamization of knowledge and the desecularization of knowledge as well. And I don't suppose even for a second that if there is any contribution made by secular contributors that should be disowned, because at the end of the day, Islam is about humanity, and obviously everybody's contribution is accepted and celebrated. However, it becomes a bit difficult to comprehend that if there is a significant portion of global population, nearly 2 billion people who believe in a particular system, and that system offers practical theories about politics, about economy, about society, about everything that we say the complete way of life. But from that abstract state, we have not been able to convert them into the functional disciplines that we teach in our institutes. Now we can blame the international liberal order, we can blame the secularization, we can blame all these things. But the question I'm trying to ask is that why did it happen that when it came to Islamic knowledge, it is reduced to everyday matters and, like you said earlier, halal and haram, whereas cosmology is no longer taken as the subject of Islam. Politics is not taken as subject of Islam. International relation isn't. Medical field isn't. That used to be the case in Baghdad, Andalus, where people, those knowledges, the disciplines were flourishing. And there is a great Muslim thought behind that. So from there to here, that constant decline. Sorry, every time when I talk about this, I have to think about, because I've been told so many times that I shouldn't use terms intellectual decline, because according to the people I'm referring to, that never happened in the Muslim world. We have the technological decline or the intellectual decline. So if I can rephrase this, the lack of formulation of those knowledge and progression of those. For example, when you talk about the cosmology, there's a great deal of cosmology we see from back in days. Half the stars we know, they are named after some Muslim person, but it was half at that time, but it's still the half. It did not progress. There is no increment that we saw, and same goes into the biological disciplines and other disciplines. In your reading of the entire thing, what do you think from there to here, this decline occurred? What were the contributing factors?
Contributing to the decline?
Yeah.
Well,
why do we not have the Islamization in our thought of the disciplines, the science and technology and everything else? Why do we think that we need to compromise on Islam to be able to do well in these disciplines?
I think this is a consequence of colonization. Once our countries were colonized and a new educational system came into place, which separated the religious from the secular, and this developed new materials for the students to study, in which Islamic contributions were erased. and replaced by Western or
Colonizers.
from the band of the colonizers,
Yeah.
scholars from among them who studied under our great scientists. Their names were replaced, and the colonizer scientists were put in place, and that's the reality that we have inherited as a consequence of colonization.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we learn a lot about Copernicus, for example, but we don't learn that he was actually influenced by Ibn Shatir. It was his calculations that influenced him. And in between, there are some Jewish intellectuals as well who helped Copernicus understand Shatir. So that's a very important piece of information, but somehow that got lost in the, well, I won't say got lost. I'll say it was hidden actually on purpose. Somebody put that away. So that part is fine. We understand that. But obviously, we can't just analyze the problem, because the analysis of problem will only give us the greater understanding of the problem, which is important. But the greater understanding of problem doesn't solve the problem unless we apply the solution. So how do we solve it now?
Well, there needs to be a renaissance in publication.
Right.
That the books which are utilized in schools be Islamized in the sense that Islamic contributions to all of these various topics, etc., that are, are highlighted, so people will know the names. When they hear Einstein, when they hear, other well-known Western scientists' names, it rings bells. It's clear in their mind. But when we mention the names of Ibn al-Haytham and Arabic Islamic names, people are at a loss completely. Who are these people? Never heard of them. So literature, it's through literature, and we were the ones that created the first books and all that, but somehow we lost the leadership in these fields, and they produced the books in the end, and they produced it according to the message they wanted to convey. So we have to replace these textbooks with books which bring out Muslim contributions to all of the various fields of learning, so that the young people can identify and see themselves in history. Otherwise we are written out of history, and you look at the colonial masters as the gods who provided the knowledge to the rest.
No, that's very true. We have, I'm going to share a little model with you in a minute. I'll take your view on that. But before that, I had a conversation with one of the people here in Pakistan who, with the same secular mindset that, oh, you Muslims, you have zero contribution in science and the philosophies, and you guys are not doing anything for you. It's all about akhirah. You do nothing in dunya. I said, yeah, sure, sir. Do you mind telling me what's your contribution? He didn't have any, because none of them actually do. So what we end up with is, and this is what I said to the gentleman, that you think by criticizing Muslims in general, you are better than us, because that's the only reason you can criticize us. So in your view, you are better than us because we have not contributed in science and the development of thought and intellect. But you are better than me because you are telling me that the people of the West did, and that makes you better than me. It makes you a newscaster. You're delivering the news that the people in the West have done that. I haven't. Yeah, okay, I should. But where does your arrogance come from? By telling me that somebody else is better than me? That makes you better than me. So this is kind of situation we also deal with. But the model I was talking about is that in my reading of the Western rather very quick rise. Yes, there is a lot of colonialism. There's a lot. It's a George Saliba has done a great deal of writing on that. How this unprecedented rise of the West. So those factors are there because they had a lot of the looted and plundered money. All of a sudden, the free labor in terms of the slavery and everything else. Leaving those factors aside for a minute, for the ordinary people, the way in which they created a thinking paradigm, in my reading, is that they shifted from having old, dead, classical heroes to living heroes within their society. Because in a very short period of time, we had people like Nash and Einstein and Neil and Bohr and all these people. People could see them walking around the streets, giving lectures, even though there was no social media around. But it was the time when it was a matter of pride for people to say that I live in the time of Einstein, I live in the time of Nash, and so forth. Whereas us Muslims, we still have to go a few centuries back, at least to say, with certain exceptions, that our heroes were people like Ibn Ashadar, for example, or Ibn al-Haytham, or al-Khwarizmi, and so forth. So you're quite right in identifying that we need to have our own people. That's very true. But at the same time, we need to understand the Western model that we can implement that here by creating our own heroes, and they can create local inspiration, and one scientist will inspire many more to become scientists. Fine, that's all good. But there's a person, I'm going to name him. Nobody in the West has heard of him. Probably most people in Pakistan have forgotten about him. His name is Allama Mashriqi. He's one of those dangerous geniuses that are so well versed in science and intellect and religion and revolutionaries. Having that package in one man is so difficult. It's rare, in fact, to have that type of a polymath. But he was. After the build-up of everything I've just said about the Western model and everything else, the reason I'm mentioning him is that on one hand, people like Einstein were the great admirers of his work. But on the other side, people like Einstein, they have become the global icons. And Allama Mashriqi's grave is in a devastated state here in the city, Lahore. Nobody even cares for the grave. There's no government backing. There are no notable universities, at least naming a department after him. So at least people get to know the name lives down. None whatsoever. So what we have done to our heroes that we did have incidentally here and there, the entire system is designed in the way that they get lost in history very, very quickly. Now, after all this, my question to you is that what you are doing, what people like me are doing, you obviously at much larger scale, me at much smaller scale. If the governments don't take responsibility and they don't do their job, how far can we go with creating this Islamization and the paradigm of Islam and desecularization of thought when our heroes, their graves are not recognizable, and the people who admire them, they are global icons?
How far can we go?
Us, the individuals, without any government support. Yes, how far can we go?
Well, I think that the people who have influence and means in the society, the various societies around the Muslim world, still have the means financially to support the effort to revive and to rebuild curriculums so that Islamization process can be revived. It's not so complex that people can't see it obviously.
Yeah.
And I have personally, given lectures in a number of countries with schools going into kindergarten to grade 12 level schools, talking to especially the high school students, and putting out ideas or thoughts along these lines, which they were very much attracted to and attached to,
Okay.
because it was something they all agreed that, they missed out on, and they wanted to catch up and be a part of that consciousness. And work was done for us in the UK. They did a book called 1001 Muslim Inventions, and they've even done a video on it, etc. A version for students in the lower grades and one for the upper grades. So, work has been done, but it's just not, hasn't been popularized. We need our educators to recommend these kinds of texts, that they be in every Muslim house. Children should have access, have free access, like an encyclopedia or whatever they want to. Encyclopedias in the past, now we have Google, and
Sure. The other knowledge does it as well. Yeah, true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
so it's really on us, on those of us who have that awareness, that consciousness, to revamp the school systems, to bring this kind of consciousness into the schools, back into the schools again. And I would add to it, that part of the new educational system should involve bringing verses from the Quran, hadiths from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, according to appropriate ages, back into the classroom, in a meaningful way, not simply putting it on the board for barakah, for getting the blessing of having it. And there's blessings there, no one can deny having there, but for the benefit of the students to become more attached to the Quran and the Sunnah. This is the foundation of our learning tree. It's based on the Quran and the Sunnah. So we want to reconnect our students with the Quran and Sunnah, so that they feel relevance to the Quran, that it does have a place in my life. It does talk about things which I'm studying in school. It is connected, to bring that consciousness up, which is right now, we have been separated to a large degree from the Quran and Sunnah. So the Quran and Sunnah is used more for barakah than for learning.
And as a constitution.
Yes.
As you were talking, I was thinking and making my brain horses work. The sense I'm getting from what you just said is that because the education has now become a business, it's a commercial endeavor. People make schools and colleges and universities because it's a commercial entity. And all commercial entities, they have to meet the public demand, the consumer demand. So through mass public awareness campaigns, if we create enough need in the consumer market, i.e. parents saying that I would send my children to those schools where knowledge is Islamized, and same goes with the colleges and universities, then perhaps constructively we would be creating those schools, because at the end of the day, these commercial entities, they will have to appease the market, right? I'm I realize I'm using a lot of commercial terms here, but I'm thinking from the commercial viewpoint that if we can't convince schools on the moral basis, then perhaps we can compel them from the consumer market side that this is what they want. And that would require a massive public engagement. I think you've given us a good project. This is something we can follow through. This probably is my takeaway from the podcast.
Inshallah, I've been beating that drum since back in the 80s and 90s. You know.
There is good appetite for that in Pakistan. It may take us some time. But at
Well,
least-
actually, I did a series called the Iman Reading Series for children who at different levels who have learned the technical skills of the language. They have to read material now to see it implemented and become familiar with it. I did a series just to demonstrate what needs to be done, what could be done, you know, in which it's for teaching English. However, it's like the Ladybird series. I don't know if you're familiar with that series.
Familiar of.
Yeah. But instead, all of the figures are Islamically connected. There are non-Muslims also in it, and also that the children in the book are from multiple backgrounds to revive also in the mind of the child that, you know, Muslims come from everywhere. You know, we're not just one clan or one ethnic group or whatever, but to get that Hajj mentality, Hajj universality, you know, always in our materials that we produce, we try to do it with that kind of openness and inclusivity in our presentations.
Surely this is something we can work on. And the more I think about it, the more paths in mind are opening up that where we can start these campaigns from, and then how do we create that market demand? And that could be.
Well, I don't think you need to create the market demand. I mean, there is a market demand already, you know, and it's a matter of just popularizing it, make it more
Putting it in
people
action,
aware.
basically.
Yeah.
Look, what I'm trying to say is that, for example, there is a market demand in Pakistan that our banking should be interest-free, despite that more than 80% of our banking is not interest-free. But the question is, we say more than 80%. There was a time when it was 100%. So this around 20%-ish, at 22 point some percent, Pakistan's banking is now Islamic. The question is, how did that change come? It's when one bank started on Islamic principles, and of course, I'm not expert in fiqh. I can't comment on how Islamic that actually is. That's a matter for different scholars. But on the face of it, people saw that's an Islamic bank. So people started shifting their money from the commercial banks into that. Then another Islamic bank opened, then another, and another. And even the commercial banks, they have started specific branches. And if they couldn't afford the entire branch, they started opening windows. So when I say market, I mean, the demand was already there. So when I say the market demand, I mean putting that into action, that don't just have that demand in theory. It all started with people shifting their money from one to the other and all of a sudden change. So when we have same sort of method we can replicate into the education sphere as well. And when schools, when they start to see that people are now more interested in sending their kids into schools where there's a greater Islamic influence on the knowledge, on the thought which is being presented to the students, then sure, that will create that competition. And hopefully with the time, you know, we can make our education halal, as it were. Inshallah, as you said. I really, really thank you for your time. It's such an honor and pleasure hosting you. I really, really thank you.
My pleasure.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh wa maghfiratuh.